A liquor store is invaded by a desperate thief, who comes armed with a gun and is prepared to make a fast buck. However, he is unaware that the quiet cashier he is menacing has endured far more severe circumstances. He is about to discover this lesson the hard way. Franklin's Liquor and Spirits was not particularly visually appealing. A diminutive establishment situated at the intersection of Valencia and Sycamore in Tucson, Arizona, a mere few miles from the interstate. It was the type of establishment where customers would arrive for their typical visit, scarcely engaging in conversation as they deposited crumpled bills across the counter. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, enveloping the entire area in a dreary yellow hue. Darrell Cunningham was absent-mindedly wiping down a section that was already spotless as he leaned against the counter behind the register. The time was nearly midnight, with only 30 minutes remaining until the establishment closed. It was the same every night for the past 6 months. The air was reminiscent of cheap beer and floor cleanser. He did not object to the routine. In reality, he favored it. Darrell had returned to a world that seemed distant after serving 4 deployments in Iraq. He did not engage in conversation or make an effort to establish friendships. The concept of living with one's back against the wall, with each inhalation a risk, was not comprehended by the civilian population. Therefore, he maintained a straightforward approach. Proceed to your place of employment. Return to your residence. Reiterate. Although it was lacking in excitement, it was nevertheless tranquil. And silence was something that he could regulate. This evening, however, silence was not an option. There was only one individual in the rear of the store, who was scanning the beer fridge as if he were in search of the meaning of life in a six-pack. The timepiece was briefly examined by Darrell. 11:32 p.m. He could begin counting the register, secure up, and return home in a few more minutes. It may be beneficial to reheat any remaining food. View a television program that is not particularly thought-provoking. Then, the door chime chimed. At first, Darrell did not even raise his head. He was merely another late-night customer, likely purchasing a snack for his journey. However, something seemed amiss. The individual who entered the room was moving at an excessive pace, as if he was attempting to prepare himself for an event. Eyes scanning the store, not the shelves, hoodie pulled low, hands shoved into the front pocket. Darrell did not tense up or make an abrupt move. He merely observed. Situational awareness. It had ensured his survival in foreign countries, and it was now second nature to him. The beverage vendor in the rear had also observed. He hesitated, examining the newcomer and Darrell, before discreetly setting his can down and exiting through the side door without speaking. A man of intelligence. The individual in the hoodie halted a few feet from the counter. Ryan Belasco. Although Darrell would not be aware of his name until much later. Mid-30s. Astonishing expression. Sunken irises. The appearance of a man who had been experiencing significant losses for an extended period. Darrell refrained from uttering any words. I merely awaited. Ryan's hands trembled within his windbreaker pocket. Then, a single, rapid, yet clumsy movement. The firearm was raised. Inconsistent. Unregulated. Desperate. Empty the register. Now. His voice fluctuated. Darrell noticed the slight bob of the muzzle and the way his fingers were grasping the grip. He was not a professional. A professional would have maintained a consistent respiration rate. A professional would not have allowed his anxiety to manifest in his posture. However, a man who is frightened. Most individuals were unaware of the dangers that a man who was frightened posed, due to the fact that dread renders individuals unpredictable. Darrell maintained his composure. Did not even flinch. This was not the first instance in which an individual had pointed a pistol at him. However, Ryan was unaware of this at the time. Scanning for specifics, he slightly inclined his head. 9mm. Model that is inexpensive. Turn off the safety system. Absence of suppressor. There are no MITs. This was not a deliberate strategy. This was the final option. And men who have nothing to lose? They were the most difficult to manage. However, Darrell had dedicated years to the acquisition of control. Ryan tightened his grasp as he licked his lips. I said. Darrell raised one palm. Slow. Intentional. I heard you. There was a tranquility in his tone. excessively tranquil. Ryan was not anticipating that. However, anticipation was about to be rendered meaningless. Ryan's respiration was irregular and feeble. A telltale sign of someone teetering between fear and reckless desperation was the twitching of his fingertips on the grip. The firearm, a high-point C9. Unreliable and inexpensive. Ryan attempted to stabilize his hand, resulting in a minor wobble. Darrell observed every aspect of the situation. However, he also observed an additional element. Ryan had yet to release the trigger. That was significant. He would not have issued a caution if the purpose of this was solely to kill. This individual was not motivated by a desire for violence. This individual was at a loss for alternatives. However, a male who is without alternatives may be equally hazardous. Darrell maintained an expressionless countenance. No sudden movements, no indications of defiance. Not yet. Slowly and deliberately, his palms hovered near the register. "You appear to be anxious," he stated in a uniform manner. "That's bad for both of us." Ryan's lips clenched. His eyes briefly glanced toward the entrance before returning. "Shut up and do what I said." "I am." Darrell maintained eye contact throughout the entire conversation. "But you don't want to do this." Ryan exhaled a brief, bitter chuckle. "Yeah. What the hell do you know about what I want?" Darrell desired to convey a volume of information that exceeded your expectations. However, he did not make a significant amount of movement, merely enough. He pressed a button on the register, and the antiquated device issued a gentle beep before the cash receptacle opened. The commotion caused Ryan to flinch. The gun rose just an inch higher as his hand flinched. Excessively agitated. Insufficiently stable. This was noted by Darrell. He removed a few dollars from the tray, demonstrating a deliberate patience that indicated he was not inclined to engage in a confrontation. Ryan required this conviction. That is what prevented a man of this caliber from firing the weapon. However, Darrell was not merely postponing the inevitable. He was observing, making calculations. The gun, the angle, the posture, and the spacing. Ryan was approximately 5 feet distant, which was sufficient for a swift maneuver if Darrell selected the appropriate moment. However, this has not yet occurred. Ryan's attention was diverted to the bills in Darrell's possession. All of it. Not just that. Darrell refrained from disputing the matter. He maintained his movements as predictable and non-threatening as he reached for additional currency. A vehicle passed by outside. A brief burst of light was transmitted through the store's glass window by the headlamps. Ryan's muscles contracted. An additional indicator. Darrell had observed it previously. Men loitering in combat zones anticipating the next detonation. The type of instinct that caused you to tremble at the sight of shadows. This individual had been residing in survival mode for an extended period of time prior to entering that door. Darrell was able to observe the tremor in Ryan's knee as a result of a minor adjustment to his foot. The disparity in weight. Hesitation. He was terrified. And men who are frightened make errors. Darrell was aware of this. However, the issue was that they were also besieged. Ryan's gaze once more shifted toward the entrance. His mind was preoccupied with something. He was engaged in a discussion regarding a matter. That was detrimental. Darrell maintained a consistent heart rate. He had encountered more severe circumstances. He had endured more severe circumstances. And what about men like Ryan? They were not designed to withstand genuine violence. They believed they were. However, they were not. The inquiry was, how long did it take Ryan to come to the realization? Because the moment he did so, everything would undergo a transformation. Darrell was not merely gazing at Ryan. He was also interpreting him. Each movement, twitch, and gaze toward the door conveyed a narrative. Ryan's grasp on the firearm was improper. Far too restrictive. His fingers were fixed, and his knuckles were bone white, as if he believed that squeezing them more tightly would render him more deadly. Darrell was informed of two facts by this. Ryan was unfamiliar with operating a firearm. It is probable that it was stolen. It is possible that it was purchased on the street. In any case, he was not adequately instructed. He was endeavoring to persuade himself that he was in control. And the moment in which an individual attempts to persuade themselves of a particular proposition? It implies that they are uncertain. Darrell permitted the silence to persist for an additional period. Forced Ryan to lie in it. He added additional dollars to the counter. "You are trembling, sir." His tone was composed and composed. "You don't want to be here." Suddenly, Ryan's respiration became labored. For a brief moment. "Please refrain from speaking. Please provide me with the funds. After this, do you have a plan?" Darrell inquired, not because he anticipated an answer, but rather because he required Ryan to consider an alternative course of action to firing the gun. Ryan's sneer was less incisive than it had been previously. His confidence was diminishing. "What is the matter with you? You are unfamiliar with me." "No, but I know this isn't you." Darrell permitted his remarks to cool. A genuine killer would not hesitate. "However, you continue to gaze at the door, as if you are anticipating an opportunity to flee." Darrell could observe the impact of that. Ryan's jaw clenched, and his posture slightly shifted. He harbored resentment toward Darrell for calling him out, as it was accurate. Darrell maintained his composure. He remained at a distance, still situated behind the counter, but he now possessed an additional quality, a cadence. A combat instructor once advised him that the enemy's strength was not the issue, rather, it was their mind. Ryan's mind was already beginning to fray. Darrell directed his gaze toward the firearm. "Safety is suspended, correct?" Ryan hesitated before nodding. Darrell responded with a sluggish assent. "That's good." Ryan's expression was bewildered. "How are you doing? Why is that so exceptional?" Darrell exhaled briefly, as if contemplating a matter. "Because if you had entered this room with it on, it would suggest that you had never intended to use it. However, you did." He paused for a moment before continuing, "And now, you must determine the next course of action." Ryan's gun hand lowered an inch, and his fingers twitched once more. His Adam's apple swayed. That was all Darrell required to observe. The fissures were expanding. Ryan may have entered this room with the belief that he possessed the power. However, the power was not in the gun. It was in the psyche of the individual who possessed it. At the moment, that individual was experiencing a loss of control. However, the issue with desperation is that it is unpredictable. Ryan abruptly leaped forward. "Stop conversing." His voice broke. "Do you believe that you are a strong individual? Shooting you is my intention." Darrell maintained his composure and did not even blink. He simply gazed back, unmoved. "No, you won't." Ryan's breath stopped as he realized that he was no longer in control of the situation for the first time since entering the store. This realization was terrifying. Ryan briefly blinked, but Darrell recognized the moment. It was that fleeting moment of uncertainty that revealed everything. The threat was diminishing, despite the fact that the pistol was still pointed at him. Ryan was aware of this. Darrell now recognized that he was aware of this fact. Suddenly, the distance between them appeared to be narrower. Darrell remained seated, his hands hovering near the register, providing Ryan with no stimulus to react to. This was the natural course of action. If a man is frightened, he will attempt to exert himself. However, if he is not given anything to press against, he will collapse under his own weight. Ryan forced himself to swallow forcefully, and his fingertips once more twitched on the trigger. Darrell was informed that Ryan's body was betraying his mind when the muzzle of the gun barely dipped. He did not arrive with the intention of killing anyone. He was present here due to his lack of alternative destinations. However, a man who was in a state of despair was still a threat. Individuals engage in foolish behaviors due to their desperation. Darrell finally spoke, his voice low and measured. He expressed no fear or wrath. Rather, he stated the truth. "If you were going to shoot me, you would have done it by now." Ryan's pupils flickered in quest of something to latch onto, a means to demonstrate that he was still in control, despite the fact that he flinched just barely. Darrell did not provide him with that. He acknowledged the firearm with a gesture. "Safety is suspended." "You have a clear shot." His voice remained unwavering. "However, you have not discharged the weapon. It is not due to your inability. Because you are unwilling to do so. Ryan's respiration increased. He loathed the reality of the situation. Stop talking. Just, please provide me with the remaining funds. Nevertheless, Darryl disregarded this. Who is anticipating your arrival? Ryan's irises trembled. What? When you exit this establishment, who will be waiting for you? There it was. The inquiry. The individual who penetrated Ryan's defenses parted his lips. However, he refrained from speaking due to his lack of an answer. Darryl had witnessed it before. Soldiers who had lost everything, those who had returned but never truly recovered. Ryan was not a combatant. However, his appearance suggested that he had been engaged in a distinct form of conflict. Darryl's tone was sufficiently mellow. Do you have children? Ryan's face twitched, and his bottom lip trembled just slightly. Darryl recognized the expression as well: regret, humiliation, and the burden of making too many incorrect decisions. Ryan's voice was so low that it was nearly imperceptible as he murmured, I had a daughter. I haven't seen her in a while. Darryl nodded slowly. Do you wish for her to observe you in this manner? That was the tipping point. Ryan's hold on the gun was slightly relaxed, but not significantly. Darryl recognized his opportunity. When an individual of his caliber recognizes an opportunity, he seizes it. Darryl moved in a controlled manner, without any aggression or speed. Ryan scarcely registered the event. His mind was already in a state of disarray, torn between the weight of his decisions and the gun in his hand. Darryl, however, observed Ryan's slackened wrists, sagging shoulders, and erratic respiration, which had transitioned to shakiness. He was departing from the altercation. Darryl's left hand suddenly extended, not in pursuit of the pistol, but in pursuit of Ryan's wrist. A swift, honed action. The type of movement that was derived solely from muscle memory, rather than conscious thought. Darryl's twisting occurred prior to Ryan's reaction, resulting in an abrupt downward yank and pressure on the joint. The force was insufficient to fracture the joint, but it was sufficient to override instinct. Ryan's grip faltered for a brief period, resulting in a strangled sound. That was all that was required. Darryl's right hand closed over the slide of the pistol, forcing it upward to ensure that the barrel was pointing upward. A struggle. A breath. Ryan's body lunged forward in an attempt to regain control. However, Darryl had already surpassed him. His hip pivoted, causing a weight transfer. Ryan staggered, causing the gun to fall. Darryl also contracted it. The tables were abruptly turned. Ryan's hands were instinctively raised as he staggered rearward. He was no longer even attempting to engage in combat. His chest rose and fell, as if he had just realized he had made the worst error of his life, and his breath was ragged. Darryl swiftly ejected the magazine by pressing his thumb, and subsequently cycled the slide to clear the chamber. The counter was struck by the projectile. The chamber was devoid of sound. Ryan's eyes were fixed on the disarmed weapon, and his hands shivered at his sides. Darryl gradually released. He did not experience the typical thrill that most individuals would anticipate. No tremors, no adrenaline surge. This was merely another form of employment. The empty gun was passed across the counter by him. Is that what you desired? He spoke in a low voice. To observe the consequences of inadvertently inflicting this on the incorrect individual. Ryan's mouth opened, but no sounds emerged. His visage was pale, and his throat bobbed. Darryl slightly leaned forward to ensure that Ryan comprehended. You never had control. Ryan blinking, he swallowed. He gazed at the gun, then at Darryl, and finally at his own trembling hands. He was not merely apprehensive at this time. He was humiliated. The sudden realization of how close he had come to something he had never wished to do, the weight of it, was all over Darryl. Darryl refrained from dialing 911 for this reason. Not yet. Due to the fact that this was not the conclusion. Ryan stood with his shoulders hunched and his breath coming in brief, uneven bursts. The fight had exhausted him. Darryl remained stationary, allowing the silence to persist and Ryan to remain in it. Occasionally, a man required the weight of his own decisions to be acknowledged in order to comprehend them. The pistol, which was currently harmless, was situated on the counter. However, Ryan did not observe it. He was gazing at the ground. Darrell inhaled. Have you ever killed a man before? Ryan's irises widened in surprise, and his mouth twitched as if he intended to speak. However, no words emerged. Darrell did not require an answer from him. He was already aware. He stated, "I have," with a level voice. He was not boasting or confessing. He was simply stating a fact. "And I can promise you, it's not something you ever walk away from clean." Ryan's lips trembled, and his palms flexed at his sides in an attempt to conceal the extent of their tremors. Darrell supported himself against the counter. Darrell gazed at Ryan with his arms crossed. "What were you planning to do, huh? Upon exiting this establishment with a few $100s, what is the next step? Should you purchase an additional few days before the inevitable occurs?" Ryan forced himself to swallow forcefully. I didn't think that far." "Indeed. That is the issue." Ryan cleaned his face with his sleeve. Darrell could discern that Ryan was resisting something, attempting to contain the internal turmoil. Darrell inquired, "You mentioned that you had a daughter. What is her name?" Ryan's voice trembled as he uttered the word, "Melanie." He flinched. Darrell hesitantly nodded. "Does she know what her father is doing out here?" Ryan's mandible was clenched, and his eyes were glistening, but he was determined not to allow anything to slip. Darrell allowed that to remain for a moment before he retrieved the empty pistol and held it in his hand. "Have you ever held one of these before tonight?" Ryan's head shook with scarcely more than a twitch. "Consequently, you did not enter this premises with the intention of shooting me." Darrell retracted the firearm. "This implies that you were fortunate." Ryan expelled a strained breath. "Lucky." He chuckled, but it was hollow. "I feel like the biggest idiot alive right now." "You should," Darrell stated unequivocally. "However, feeling like an idiot is not the worst possible outcome. Feeling like a murderer is an experience that is impossible to overcome." Ryan inhaled, his gaze diverting from Darrell. "Consequently, what transpires next? Are you contacting the authorities?" Darrell examined him. He could now discern the weight, the regret, and the fear. His fear was not the kind that rendered him dangerous, but the kind that made him realize he was perched on the precipice of a cliff. And tonight, someone had just prevented him from plummeting. He sharply exhaled, then retrieved the cash from the counter and deposited it back into the register. Subsequently, he redirected the pistol toward Ryan. Ryan trembled. "What?" Darrell fixed his gaze on him with a frigid, unwavering certainty. "You got a choice," he said in a low voice. "Walk out that door and keep going down this road, or turn around and fix whatever the hell put you here in the first place." Ryan gazed at the gun with awe, as if it were an object he did not recognize any longer. He then slowly, with quivering hands, pushed it back across the counter. He murmured, "I do not desire it." Darrell nodded. "Subsequently, return home." Ryan's larynx vibrated as he turned, his hands still trembling. He proceeded toward the door, but he hesitated and gazed back. "What is the reason for your decision to release me?" His voice was raw and hoarse. Darrell exhaled, "Because someone once granted me a second chance when I was undeserving. Additionally, I am opposed to the notion of squandering teachings." Ryan forced himself to swallow forcefully before exiting into the darkness without uttering another word. Darrell waited until Ryan had departed before retrieving the firearm. He would contact the authorities and inform them that a weapon had been left at the store. However, Ryan would not be mentioned. A man was required to engage in certain conflicts independently. Life is not about avoiding mistakes. It is about the actions one takes after they have been made. While some individuals may go too far and cannot be undone, others require a moment, a second opportunity, or a justification to deviate from the path before it is too late. It is possible that Ryan would take that risk. However, it is also possible that he would not. However, he managed to escape tonight with his essence intact.